And so we've got this idea that this work ethic that's just been hammered into us, that work, 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 work. One of the biggest signs of burnout is the lack of ability to get away from that. Burnout, by definition, is constantly being on.
Welcome to the pilot episode of Squeaky Shoes Media Podcast, where we are talking to a variety of specialists about all kinds of things that business owners and executives and anyone who works in business might need or could find helpful. And our first episode today is with Kendal Allsop, who is fabulous. And we'll give you a little introduction of who he is, but we're going to talk a little bit about burnout, anxiety, stress, and how to handle those things as a business owner specifically. So Kendal has been a mental health worker for over 30 years. He has a master's in administration and clinical social work, correct? From the University of Utah, and a bachelor's degree in psychology from Brigham Young University. He's supported individuals and families through an array of mental health struggles, and now using his experience and expertise, he is helping business owners and executives like me, which is why he's here. Kendal has worked one-on-one with executives as well as giving presentations to companies, helping support with burnout, stress, things like that all of us struggle with and need. And today he has graced us with his presence out of his busy schedule to give us some advice and help us through our insanity of becoming business owners. We're so excited to have you, Kendal. Thank you for being here. And if you don't mind, we'd love to ask you to start off just sharing a little bit about what drew you into working with executives after working so long in the mental health industry. What is it that draws you into working with business executives and business owners?
So I think a big part of it is my private practice work. Right after I got my master's degree, I ended up moving to Houston, and I ended up working part-time doing therapy and full-time doing IT work. And I worked with a lot of attorneys that doing litigation and was doing their computer work. And this is kind of a weird story, but I got a phone call one night at 1 a.m. from an attorney that was just freaked out that he couldn't get his AOL email. And so it's way back when email was at the beginning, and we weren't hosting our own email server. And so he was very, very upset and very freaked out. And I remember hanging up the phone going, he needs to talk to a therapist. And my logic is I had clients before that were getting evicted, they were homeless, they were having panic attacks, they were barely even coping with life. And here I've got a guy can't get his email that's unraveling. And that kind of always at that point kind of stuck in my mind a little bit. I know it's a weird story that doesn't relate to why I would do it, but it made me realize that everybody's struggling with something. It's just not the thing that you usually think it is. You think, okay, business executives are doing great, but it's a group of guys that are generally under a lot of pressure. Women in the executive thing face a lot of struggles trying to feel like they've got to keep up. They don't want to show any weakness. And and so there's a lot of hiding about stuff. There's a lot of, I'm not gonna let people know I'm not coping. And so it's a group of people that tends to mask and hide a lot of stuff about when they're struggling. And it's not like I want them to kind of come out and announce they're having trouble, but in a weird sort of way, it's an underserved population. And so they're concerned about being judged and what people are going to think of them if they show any weakness. There's certain professions out there that with a mental health diagnosis, it could, lead to you being audited for your job and whether or not you could be capable of doing your job or it'd be held against you. And so, and living outside of Houston, the side of Houston I'm on has a lot of executives living in that half of the town. They all kind of congregate on the west side of town. And so I would get a lot of, family members, and in the process of seeing a child or somebody, I would kind of get to talking with the parents, and they were having a lot of trouble. And so my clientele kind of started pushing that way a little bit, and I just enjoyed it. There are people that typically get a lot of benefit from it that are because of the nature of what they're doing. They've got a lot of skill and ability, and they're usually at the top of their game in what they're trying to do. But on the other hand, they don't get a lot of necessary like coaching as they're dealing with that. And it kind of is unique to be able to be in a position where you get to have, 20, 50, 100 people criticize what you're doing day after day after day about how the job is and how well you're doing it and whether you're good enough to be doing it. Most people don't have that kind of criticism happening. And so there's a little bit of a unique kind of way of a situation where they've got to kind of learn to cope. I mean, it's a part answer. So it's kind of an interesting fun at the beginning, and I've gotten a lot. It's just been rewarding to do that, so
It's
that I
actually
kind
a
of
super
lean into
fascinating
it.
take on
Yeah.
executives. It's something even as a business owner, I've never really thought through it that way, but everything you said, I'm going, yep, yep, yep.
Well, and as a business owner, which, I've kind of managed to get myself into that position, you don't usually have in that place a bunch of coworkers that you can lean to and say, wow, today sucked,
Yeah.
or that didn't go the way I wanted. A lot of times you're just left alone in your own head to kind of figure it out. Is the money going to add up? Is this deal going to go through? Um, I, I, I went with a friend of mine, he wasn't a client, but I remember him. We did a couple days. We met up in a town with our wives and went to an amusement park, and he had this very big deal going on that he was getting hourly 2-hour updates on, well, we turned this paperwork in, but that I wasn't dotted and such didn't finish this last night. And this was a really big deal that involved, people's jobs, over 200 people's jobs and livelihood. And, whether or not things were going to get better or they were going to not be good. And so I kind of watched him deal with that all weekend. And that's kind of the same turf you get when you own a business. You work extra hours. If something's not right, you're the one that's got to handle it. You can complain about your coworkers, but it's really at the end of the day your responsibility to get things to work. And so it's kind of an isolating place. And usually it's pretty competent people that are doing this kind of thing, but they also tend to feel like they shouldn't ever get support for it. There's a tendency to just kind of keep loading it on and loading it on and kind of hoping it works out. And if you're 22, 25, you can beat yourself up that way, but you start getting older and older and older, and that strategy doesn't work so well. It starts to unravel on you.
I think even as a 22, 25-year-old, it sure takes a mental hit, right? I mean, I'm in my 30s
Oh,
now, and
yeah.
it is hard. It is a very, very isolating thing. And I think that's something I didn't realize getting into business was how isolating it would feel. Even though you're talking to people all day long and trying to network and connect with potential clients and talking to your current clients, your family kind of gets tired of hearing about things that they're not invested in. It's nothing that's important to them, really. I mean, you're important to them, so they try to make it
Yeah.
important, but
Yeah. They
there's no one
try.
that really connects. Yeah.
Well, and there's a certain kind of disruption that if you come home and the thing that you talk about is your work and your work stress to your family, it doesn't create a healthy work-life balance. It starts to affect your relationships too much. And so sometimes, even if you've got good support there, it's probably not a good idea to lean on that as your only and primary way of coping. Um, and so it's good to have some, multiple pillars to stand on, so not everything's putting, all the weight in one place. Relationships can be delicate at times. I mean, they go through good times and bad times, and you put that kind of added pressure on it, and the good times and the bad times tend to become more extreme
Mhm.
if you're not careful. Um, and so, getting support for that really increases, the chance that your family life is going to stay in balance. And also part of what I do is kind of help people say, how do I talk to this about my spouse? Because it's not unusual for some people to not even bring their spouse in on anything, and they're totally oblivious to the pressure they're going through. Um, and others are leaning into it way hard. So sometimes there's a balancing conversation in there of how much, and then we also have the conversation often about who else you have.
Mhm.
There's a lot of, I call it movie friends. There's a lot of value in having friends that are good enough to go to the movies to, but may not understand your whole life. They may not understand what you do. They may not understand, the pressures or what you're thinking, or they may not even be a good person to rely on to keep a secret, but they're reliable to go to the movies. And those people, when we understand how they fit into our life in a healthy way, we can say, that's my movie friend. We don't put pressure on them to be something that they don't want to be, and then they're not upset and we're not disappointed, but yet that's a valuable thing to have people in your life that are on different levels of support. And a lot of people that are working on their own, or executives or self-employed, they're losing those other pillars. They're kind of falling away, those things are. And so over time, it's not unusual to not have much of that going on.
Yep. Hmm. I completely understand that one. So that's actually I sent out a question to a couple of business groups I'm in to ask what if they got to do a one-on-one with someone like you, what would they ask? And that's actually one
Oh,
of the ones that was asked was how do I create boundaries with work-life balance? So you talk about pillars. What are some of the other pillars you would talk about? So you talk about maybe, you can talk to family, but just be careful how you do it. Find those movie friends. What other kinds of pillars or coping mechanisms would you suggest to a client who is struggling with that balance? Because it is tough, especially when you're
it's,
a solopreneur, right? And you're doing it all by yourself and
yeah.
you don't have anyone else working with you. It can consume you. So I'd love to understand a little bit more about.
Well, and that's there's this idea that if I'm one of the middle managers or one of the bosses, and you walk in and you don't feel like, you can sit down and have lunch with everybody, because there might be some inappropriateness about how that might appear. We have a lot of that kind of stigma in business of what do those relationships look like, and is it showing favoritism and stuff. And so we have a lot of those kinds of problems. I mean, to back up, one of the things that I talk to people about is this idea of support systems and friendships. If you think of them kind of like a pyramid, and if you broke the pyramid into close, very personal relationships that people get you, that would be the top of the pyramid. These are the people that you can confide in them. They keep you things confidential appropriately. They're candid and supportive, and they're great. Those are the ones we kind of think about. Man, I need 100 of those. But typically, they sit at the top of the pyramid. And then if you imagine down at the pyramid as it gets wider, we have a big base of what I call acquaintance people. These are people that we might bump into at church, or see at a gym, or we don't see them regularly, but we might see them frequently. My wife's got friends everywhere, so she's got two or three friends that she knows at the local grocery store, and she takes forever to shop. Because of it, because she stops and asks them how they're doing, and they chat for a little while, and as she goes in and she bumps into them. And so these are they're not deep relationships. We kind of label them as superficial, but I don't think that does them justice. Um, they're relationships, they're connections. And when we have connections with people, we tend to feel better. We tend to psychologically and emotionally cope better. And so one way of looking at it is the top of the pyramid. If The way I kind of look at it is we start with a big base, and we've got this big base of people that our lives touch. And then we go up the base, and we've got fewer people where it's more significant. We spend more time with them. This would be coworkers. This would be people we might do at church or hobbies with, or be in a running club. And we see them more often. We spend a significant amount of time with them. And so we've got a fewer group of them. And then we got this small group. And what sometimes happens is we'll meet an acquaintance, and then they'll move up to the middle, and then they'll move up to the top group. And we have this expectation that this should be flipped. I should have a ton of people at the top and a couple of superficial people at the bottom. But if we kind of look at it in a way, the base is as important as the top. It's just different. I want a lot of people at my base. Pyramids are nice and strong with a big base. And so having a lot of people in my life that are not necessarily deep relationships, but are just positive relationships, or people that I run into contact with, that gets me a big base. And from that base, we usually kind of bring up or get to know certain people that move up into the middle that form a more significant place in our life. And then those people from there, a smaller and smaller group kind of rises up to the top. And so that, to use that movie analogy, I might have a movie friend, which is kind of a middle level friendship. That's great, but it's also nice to be able to, I don't play golf, but go to golf and know the people there at the golf club and the people that check you out and say hi and get a smile and a couple little bit of chit chat. That supports us. That helps us to feel stronger and less isolated and connected to the world around us. And so what we need is we need this variety of relationships. And what that starts to do is it starts to take pressure off. We don't necessarily need 50 close personal friends. In fact, it's kind of stressful. We tend to do okay with a few. Zero's not right. 50 is probably too much. But on the other hand, I don't want to walk around through life not connecting with anybody on a basic level. I need to be able to connect in lots of different places. And so when I notice when people are not doing well and they're isolating, it's weird. They start to disconnect on every level. They quit talking to people or making small talk as they go to a car wash. They say nothing and go through instead of smile and have a little bit of dialogue. Or, they just go there, get their thing done and go home. And what you see is this lessening on every level of withdrawing from all the relationships. And so, yeah. And so the advantage of looking at it in this way, then what I'm doing is I'm not looking for a person to be my close friend and saying, no, 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 no. I'm saying, I know you. How do you fit into my life and how can I make that better? So if I've got a coworker that maybe I'm supervising, I can say, how can I be a bigger part of each other's life in the way that our relationship will allow? And I can do something to strengthen that a little bit. That might mean, doing a little bit better gift on birthday. We give them a little card and a little something and pay attention a little bit more. It could look like that for that level. It might be on the base level, spending more time with just people that we're introduced to or meet, and just take a couple more minutes with them. And then on that close personal level, that's the one we dwell on the most, I think. We can ask the same question and say, how are we connected? In what way are we connected? What way do I want to improve it? What way do I want to let it go? And so now I'm not so much forcing somebody that's in the middle level, a square peg there on the middle, trying to fit them in a round hole at the top of my relationship because I need somebody there. And I'm also continually kind of nourishing, because at the top, people will come and go through that top place in our life. And then I've got this abundant base to kind of people to progress through. And then we have other friendships at other times in our life. I mean, it's unusual for a high school friendship to last all the way through 50 years of adulthood. It occasionally happens and we hear about it, but we have our close personal high school friends, and then we kind of get our close personal college friends. A few more of those follow people through life. But as we move or change careers or do different things, that group changes. And so we kind of have to have this dynamic kind of look about it. Instead of when we're isolated and stressed, we have this fixated look. I've got this, I've got that, and I got this, and we don't adapt. We don't look to nourish any of the relationships. That's a long answer.
It's a good answer, though. I'd never thought about that in that way either. And as you were talking, as an introvert, I tend to definitely fall into the trap of isolating myself, even though I feel like it's my job that's isolating me. But the more I think about it, because I feel like it's emotionally exhausting, right? I had someone explain to me once that your emotions are a budget, just like your finances. And that was one of the most incredible, mind-blowing realizations is I have to be careful with my budget. And for me, sometimes it feels overwhelming and like it costs too much to keep those baseline relationships. But on the flip side, the fact that they don't know everything that's going on and I don't have to go deep into everything that's happening in my life, it's almost a chance to let go and
Yeah,
actually disconnect, which I hadn't realized until you said that. But
which
I
is okay.
connect with those. That's a
Yeah,
good thing.
especially introverted person
Yes.
kind of gets stuck in this idea that every relationship has to have a big investment personally.
Right.
If you watch outgoing people, they're not doing that. They're not investing 100% in an acquaintance. They're just throwing some energy that way.
Right.
And so it's not that the person doesn't matter, it's they tend to be a little bit more proportional in their effort they're putting out. For some reason, I think it's, it was once explained to me, and this is what I like about this definition, is introverts want connections to other people also. They just don't get energy from the relationship as much.
Right.
Where an extrovert actually draws energy from people. So they go to a party and they get wound up and excited and feel great, where an introverted person is going to tend to run out of energy as the night goes by. And so I think when you've got that going on, there's a tendency to look at, okay, I've got to put a ton of energy into the person at Kroger's, and I got to have a deep, meaningful relationship with them. And we kind of put them in the same category as a close personal friend. Well, if I'm sort of budgeting my energy, like you said, I'm now setting up an expectation that intuitively I'm going, well, I don't want to really throw a lot of energy there. And so it kind of forces us in that black and white mindset of I either do it or I don't.
Right.
And if we're really stressed and tired and busy, we tend to opt not to. Whereas we go into a situation and say, hey, I'm going to be here at 2 hours with a lot of people around me. I'm going to say hi. I'm going to make some small talk. This is a 2 hour thing. I don't have to make a close personal friend. I don't need any home runs, but I am going to socialize and I am going to connect on that level. And that takes the pressure off, and it doesn't need to be quite so draining for an introverted person. An extroverted person is just going to kind of roll into that anyway.
Right.
And that's not going to necessarily, like I said, they're going to get energy from that situation. And so, it's remarkable. I'm a heavily introverted person. And so going to the store with my wife and having talked to all the people, she tends to push things up and make friends and move people to the middle level. And then I come in and feel obligated to form a friendship with her at a middle level. And I'm kind of like, well, I can do the acquaintance thing and I can smile and I can be nice and we can connect and you're a great person and a story or two is great, but it can overload me a little bit. But what I've learned to do is not shut off. I got to learn to say hi in the hallways. I need to talk to people. I need to say how you're doing. I need to share a little bit about my life. If I'm doing it in small bits, that's not going to kill me. But if I feel like I got to win everybody over, then that's going to be overwhelming.
Right. That's a great explanation for that.
Doesn't have to be that. Yeah.
I love that. Okay. So one of the other questions that came in, let me see which one makes sense to
I
me.
kind of didn't answer the boundary part of it, but
Oh, that's true. Let's chat a little bit more
you
about
want a quick answer on the boundary? It won't be a deep answer, but it'll be an interesting way of looking at it. Is typically we look at boundaries as a fence to keep people out.
Mm-hmm.
And I've not really liked that boundary. Boundaries are about making healthy decisions of who I'm letting in.
Mm.
And I think this idea of, well, they're not healthy, I need to push them away. They're not healthy, I need to push them away. I don't like the framing of that, because what we're doing unconsciously is we're starting to push everybody away the minute something gets a little bit difficult. But a boundary, when we look at the definition, the question's more stated in how close should this person be to me? So it's not about a fence, not about a wall, on this side or that side. It's about, well, I know you're good for me. I'm going to pull you closer.
It's kind of like that pyramid, deciding which level they get to
Yeah.
live on.
Yeah. It's, I don't know you so much, so I'm going to keep you a little bit further away because you're kind of a train wreck. It's kind of like you're my best friend, but you drink too much at a party. So we're going to keep you a little bit of a distance at the party. And I'm not going to be really close to you as we go through, as you do this. But hey, next week playing golf or hanging out, that's great. We'll probably closer. So there's more of a kind of a question of fluidity, and it makes us be more responsible for that. We're basically deciding, I need to pull you closer. I need to adjust this. I need, and it's less about getting into that mind frame of keeping things away. And so when we look at coworkers, the decision, coworkers or people I supervise, it's about, okay, how can I pull this relationship into me in the way that fits the situation? And not just say it's a wall, it's a wall, it's a wall. Because every good professionals learn to pull people into them. The most successful people, when we look at their biographies and hear about them, they're pulling people towards them every chance they get. And what they get good at is learning how far to pull people in. Walt Disney didn't bring everybody home, but boy, he was really good at taking a superficial relationship and pulling it into him in that situation, in that moment. And then he kind of walks away. It's not, you guys don't spend the rest of life together. So there's lots of these stories of him walking around the park and him stopping and pulling people in. And so that's a boundary. That's a very healthy boundary, but he didn't take them home.
Hmm.
He didn't introduce them to his wife and kids. Um, and so that's more of that idea of I think it gets us into a healthier concept of boundaries, because boundaries, I think, is turned into just how do I create a list of keeping people out.
Right.
And I just don't think I don't think that's a correct definition, but I think that's the one that people visualize the most.
Yeah, absolutely. So along those lines, I'm curious to hear what would you say for strategy or tactic wise to help business owners with setting boundaries with clients? Because I know that was something that I have had to learn as a business owner, because as an employee, the boss usually took the brunt of, scope creep or whatever else that happened, or hard to work with clients that were not always kind, or, whatever it may be. I could kind of shift that over to the owner. Now that I'm in the owner position,
Yeah,
I'm having to learn how
you've
to
got
do
to
that.
decide that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So what kinds of strategies or tactics would you suggest to someone who is maybe struggling with that, or at the beginnings of trying to learn how to handle the boundaries in the way that you said? Because I love that. It's so much more positive.
It's more positive. Now, I'm going to give you my way of dealing with it. You know, you don't always get to choose who you're working with,
Right.
whether it's a coworker, a fellow employee, you're supervising, or your business owner, and it's a client. You don't usually get to pick that. And so when we use the idea of boundaries being how can I pull people appropriately close to me, it kind of saves us in that definition, because what I want to do with a client is I do want to draw them in. And so if we sit and think, okay, how can I put a wall up and keep this person away from me? Well, in
Right.
a way, that's a bad client model.
Yeah, it kind of hurts
You
the
know,
relationship, which
yeah,
hurts.
it's hurting the relationship, and
Yeah,
I'm kind of pushing away business. That
exactly.
black and white kind of sting of saying, well, this is inappropriate, I got to push you away. And then, but it does create a chance to problem solve. Instead of making it this black and white thing, I start to have to ask my question of saying, where should I connect? Where can I connect? And then maybe a little bit of an understanding of saying, oh, okay, they're stepping over this too much. They're coming into this range of my life too much. And so I can put up a little bit of a buffer there. I don't have to put up a giant wall, but I can put a little buffer there where I'm a little bit disinterested when they hit those topics,
Mm.
or I give a superficial answer, or I don't get as heavily involved or make as good a eye contact when they ask those too personal, inappropriate question or something or behavior. But yet, on the other hand, when they say, how can I do this, or how can you do this? And they talk about more appropriate things, then I'd be more involved. It's more about I can make more eye contact. I can do more follow up. I can create more of a connection there. And people want to usually be connected. And so I can't say all of the time, because there's some kind of highly dysfunctional people out there, but a great deal of people will pick up on the idea that says, our relationship isn't in this area, our relationship's over in this area. And I don't really have to sit there and come up with this really black and white, uncomfortable thing. I can, no, it's more work. I'm going
Mhm.
to have to sit down and say, okay, where is it I can connect with this person? Um, my wife used to joke whenever we'd move and I'd go to a new church building, and I'd get done with the meeting, because this pattern happened over a number of years. She goes, who was it that irritated you today? Who was it that went wrong? And, I looked at her and I'd roll my eyes, because what she was getting at is that ironically, the way I used to usually approach people is that those people ended up becoming friends of mine. And so somebody would come up and they'd ask something inappropriate or tell a joke that kind of bugged me, or they did something that was kind of irritating. And what would happen is I kind of used as policy on them where I wouldn't react to that, but I would kind of make an effort over here and say, okay, where can I find a common ground with you? Because I don't want to spend the rest of my life in this uncomfortable spot that you started us with.
Right.
And so I'd try and find ways to move it over. And inadvertently, what I would end up doing is a lot of my long-term friendships have come from that awkward box.
Hmm.
Um, and, ironically, people that are first connections where it was comfortable I didn't put the effort in of saying, where do we need to connect? And so in a way, the relationship kind of stalled out and just kind of stayed there. So there's an opportunity sometimes that we can get from those situations. We have a lot more capacity to have meaningful relationships with people that we don't agree with than we think.
I
It's one of the things that I think we're just very underdeveloped in, and we're even told that we can't do it. But I think we're very, very capable of having good relationships with people that we don't totally understand. I mean, some of my closest friends, we don't have a lot in common, and we don't have careers that overlap. And a lot of times they still do things that I just kind of don't make sense to me. But we've got a good relationship and we can spend a lot of time together and have a lot of fun, and it works just fine. But there is a certain packet of things that, especially at the beginning, we didn't go there. Now, as the relationship got stronger, ironically, a lot of those things we've circled back around later, and we can get into them, but we moved up on the pyramid in that time. This relationship at the base would never handle it, but this relationship would. So when it comes to clients, I may not be pushing them to the top, but I could ask the question of while they're here and why I'm interacting with you, where is it that we can have a good interaction? Where is it that we can create a connection? What things can I do to encourage that? And where are the things that I might have to be just a little bit stubborn and a little bit non-reactive about? And kind of move it that way. Now, occasionally we'll have to just be direct and say, yeah, I'm not going there. That's not something that I'm going to, go with. But if we've leaned into the positive ends of the relationship, we're probably not going to lose them as a client by doing that.
It kind of
You
buffers
know,
that they're more open
it
to
buffers it a
seeing
little
that.
bit. Yeah. When we get in that model of black and white boundaries, we don't create anything positive to support the relationship as we push them away. And so we're inadvertently kind of pushing them over a cliff. And so it's not about moving them away. It's about creating a relationship that we can keep them close and interact in a healthy way. And sometimes that does mean jiggling the distance a little bit, but we can create a connection with anybody. Some of the greatest people in the world, one of their great abilities was they can create connections with anybody.
It's a
That's the
talent.
trait that, yeah, it's a big talent. It's a powerful thing, and it changes a lot of lives when you've got the ability to do that with people you're uncomfortable with.
Right. And that's incredible advice for anybody in business. I feel like, or honestly, even just any relationships in general. But I love that in business because I feel like it is, like you said, you don't get to pick who you work with. And so it can be really difficult sometimes if you get into a situation where someone is so different than you. Sometimes that can cause some rifts with that relationship. So I love that advice to look for the positive, focus on those. And I've had experiences with that before where I've worked with people that others just really didn't enjoy working with or didn't enjoy interacting with. And we became really good friends by the time I left that
Yeah,
job.
yeah, there's a lot of potential there.
Right.
Yeah, I knew a young man a few years ago that, man, 19 years old, from a strong Muslim background, 19 years old, and very reckless with his substance abuse. I don't relate to much of that. I'm an old man. I'm a white old man that's lived a fairly conservative life, and there's not a lot about his youth that I can even relate to other than I knew people that were doing what he was doing. I certainly couldn't understand the idea of, his ethnic background and his religious background. But the interesting thing is that looking for those connections is we had we had some fun dialogues at the beginning about Red Bull and Monster drinks, because he would come in and he'd be chugging a Monster, and we would have discussions about it and laugh about it, and he would talk about the different flavors and different things like that, and that created a place for us to connect and a common ground. And we spent some time at the beginning because he didn't want to meet with me as much, and we would not just sit in two chairs and talk. That was my thing. He'd rather move around, so we found some ways for us to dialogue in a different way. And so, I can't, we're not good buds, probably because of age, and he's moved away and gone on with his life, but we certainly had a lot of fun talking, and we certainly enjoyed each other's time. And if he was to show up today, we'd have a great time again. But we didn't start with that common thing, and that could have been abrasive and uncomfortable, And I could have been kind of judgmental and saying, hey, you're living a really reckless life. And, how's that affecting your parents? And I could have come at it from that parental role that I'm relating to a lot in my own head. But that isn't what that would have created a boundary further from me. And so I asked what would bring him in. And so like I said, we started with Monster and Red Bull. And I don't drink tons of it, but I can understand it. I've got ADD and I get how it makes your head clearer. And and so it was a relatable thing. And then you build from there.
That's awesome. Okay, I want to kind of do a little bit of a shift. You work a lot with burnout and stress as well, correct? And we got two questions that are actually related to both of those. So I'm going to give you both, and then you can kind of answer however you feel best.
Okay.
The first question was, what mindset shifts can help business owners stay motivated during challenging times? So avoiding burnout or handling it. And how to manage stress and avoid burnout when you're juggling so many responsibilities. I mean, we've discussed this a little bit already of when you're a business owner, you're kind of everything, right? You're on your own, you're isolated a lot of the times, you're carrying so much weight, trying to do so many jobs. How do you handle the stress of that in order to not totally burn out and just crash in the first few years? And what kinds of mindset shifts can business owners take advantage of or try in order to stay motivated and excited when things are hard?
There's a lot of questions in
There's
there.
a lot in that.
So I'm just going to hit the things that kind of come to mind most, and it won't answer all of those by any means. So I kind of burnout for me kind of says, how can I get ahead of this?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times we deal with burnout in the middle of it or at the end of it when it's the worst. And I think the smart way of dealing with burnout is kind of coming up with this whole person kind of thing. And what I mean by that is think of seasons. When we're going to have seasons where we're going to be overloaded, and then we're going to have seasons where we're not. And what we need to do is kind of start thinking in terms of taking advantages of the differences. And, if you're a farmer 100 years ago, summer's busy. The days are long. There's a lot to be done. You've got to get food. You've got to get everything done. And then it never occurred to me, but what do you do in the middle of winter when there's 4 feet of snow? And the days are really short. Well, you go out and get the wood you chopped, and you make a little bit make some food, and you sleep a lot and read a book. They didn't do tons and tons. They weren't out there 10 hours a day. They slept more, and so this concept of seasons is sort of important in dealing with burnout. It's the idea that I've got to learn when I'm not loaded to step back.
That's
And
tough.
it's really tough because a
Yes.
lot of times we get this idea that I've always got to be on, I've always got to go.
Now, I
And
personally
so,
start to panic and I get antsy when I feel like I don't have anything
yeah,
to do. It's
yeah.
so hard for me to relax.
Yeah, I used to get between semesters in school and I would get anxious because there would be nothing happening.
Yep.
You know, I'd sit down and I go, okay, nothing, you don't have anything on your to-do list for school or for work or family responsibilities. And I'd get kind of anxious because the voice in my head would say, shouldn't you be doing something productive?
Right.
And and to be honest, I've learned to tell that voice to go take a hike because no, I shouldn't be doing something productive. I probably should be just stepping back, you know. And so we've got this idea that this work ethic that's just been hammered into us, that work, 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 work. One of the biggest signs of burnout is the lack of ability to get away from that.
Hmm.
Burnout by definition is constantly being on. That's one of the main problems. And so when we think of seasons, we say, what's this season? How fast should I be running? What do I have coming up? If I know I've got a lot of pressure coming up ahead of me and, some big deal is going to come through and it's going to require 3 months and it's going to take all my time and energy, then I need to be looking at, okay, that's going to happen there. What should I be pushing back on right now and taking some time and decompressing?
Right.
Because we tend to be, most of the time we handle stress very well when we deal with it like it's supposed to be dealt with. And what I mean by that is stress is part of our fight or flight mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
and it affects us. And so when we look at how that's supposed to work, a bear jumps out at me. I go into a fight or flight mindset. My body literally gets rushed with chemicals to prepare me to fight, run away, or play dead. And I'm flooded with those chemicals. My brain actually alters its function. So I get rid of math and language and reading and communication and empathy and time management. I don't need those things. All I need to do is to make a very simple decision. Am I fighting the bear, running away from it, or am I playing dead? And so we shut off all those higher order functions. And what happens is, hopefully we get away from the bear. So we go up, the bear leaves, and we come back down. And we actually have some mechanisms that test in our brain that says, are we safe now? Are we safe now? And we say yes, and it comes back down. That curve that's a stress curve. I run a race up. I'm done running the race. I give a talk. I'm under stress. I come back down. Okay. We've got these higher order brains. Well, we can create bears in our head. We can create monsters in our thinking. And what we tend to do is we go, I got this thing to do and that thing to do, and I always need to be working, and I can't ever make a mistake, and I've always got to get it right, and I've got to go, 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 or I'm going to starve to death in my old age. And I'm doing this constantly. And what we do is
Your
we're
stress
creating,
levels are just like this.
we got these bears, we push it up, and then we do this jiggle where we think we're coming down, but we're not. We're always elevated. We're always triggered. So what we've got is this tendency to live in that zone. And so part of what happens when we're in that thinking is we've got a terrible view of the future. Because one of the things that gets damaged in that high level of stress is our ability to manage time well and see it. So everything starts to feel like it's always going to be this moment. Which kind of feeds into the problem. We get discouraged at that. Life's always going to be stressful. It's always going to be negative. It's always going to be overwhelming. And our ability to look forward and backward actually gets impaired with that mindset. So we can't look back and say, did I ever have a calm point in my life? And our brain will go, no, it's always sucked. Our ability to literally see outside of that situation, it's been tunnel visioned. And so we get stuck there. So when we start forcing ourselves to think of seasons and we go up into this mindset, if I've trained my brain to look for it, we say, this is just a season. So now I'm up in this elevated state and I'm looking for the season to end. I'm elevated right now. This is stressful. It's going to go on and it's going to end here. If I don't do that, then my subconscious brain is saying, this is going to go on, this is going to be difficult, and it's never going to end. It's just staying this way.
Right.
So if I'm starting to look for the exit, and I'm also starting to look for the way to take advantage of being down, because that panicked brain, when life slows down, if I'm still panicked, I'm not going to go down with it because I've kept myself paranoid and anxious. I've got to learn to come down with it and say and recognize things are okay. It's now fall. I don't have to be going 90 miles an hour. I can relax. And being able to be in a mindset where we can recognize that, see that, and actually kind of allow ourselves to do it. So I had to teach myself to say, no, I'm done. It's in between semesters. I got a month off. I don't need to be doing anything else. It's fine if I don't do anything. It's a great idea. I mean, I can waste time and it's all right. That's fine. We're in the off. We're in the low part. And so managing stress is understanding that concept so you can kind of take advantage of that so that we know. And then when I had my stake patriarch, we had an open house just before I went on my mission, and stake patriarch comes by and he puts his arm around me. And I'm thinking a very wise man is, going to give me some advice. And he goes, and he said that, he goes, I got some advice for you. And he says, this is what I've told all my children when they've went out in the world or gone on missions. He says, remember this very carefully. He says, when you're working, work hard. And when you're playing, play hard. And he just patted me on the back and he walked off. And I remember thinking, that is the suckiest advice I've ever heard.
That's amazing.
But as I've gotten older, I've
a
appreciated
19-year-old.
it a lot more. Yeah. And so it's over the years, his voice comes in my head. And on those down times, his voice comes in and he says, this is a playtime. And you're doing a crappy job of playing. This is a really mediocre playtime. It says, you've got time off. What should if you're following this rule, I should be playing hard right now, which is listing what are the things that give me rest and make me feel better and get me excited about life. I should be just leaning into those things like crazy instead of living at the office. And then when things are a grind, I can say to myself, you know what? Now's the time to work hard. I'll grind. This has an ending. And when it has an ending, I'm going to go play hard. And so that starts to get us that balancing thing. Because if we can go up and come down, we survive that very well. If we go up and stay up, we don't survive that very well. The measurement on stress, it doesn't damage people, everybody. Weird studies. It's not stress. It's how we deal with stress. It's how we look at it. Some of the longest lived people are people that have high stress lives and jobs, but see that as just part of life, and they deal with it. And then they take their time when they get their time, and they come down from it when they get it. Some of the people that die the most are the ones that are afraid of stress and do everything to avoid it. They actually have as high or highest risk of dying early from stress related diseases because they're actually avoiding it, and so it's stress isn't the problem. It's the healthy mindset. It's the how am I leaning into it? There's nothing wrong with being stressed. There's nothing wrong with working hard. There's nothing wrong with leaning into it, but I've got to give it some endings. I've got to bring it down. And even if it's for short periods of time, but we're going to the other thing to remember, this problem, this kind of ties into it in a weird sort of way. It's like being sleep deprived. I can choose to be sleep deprived for a while. I can choose to stay up for a while. And then at some point, if I'm smart, I'm going to make a decision on when to bring the pressure down.
Right.
And when I'm going to take a nap. Because if I don't, what'll happen is my body will start making me go to sleep, and it will pick. And it's not very smart, so it will pick for me to go to sleep at an intersection or standing in a hallway, and it's going to pick a spot where it's going to get me hurt and it's going to be dangerous. And so when we're looking at high pressure careers and jobs, we've got to accept the fact that even though I feel like I need to, I can't do this indefinitely. And when we start having those burnout symptoms is our body taking charge of something we should have decided to do. So I should have decided to pull back and relax. And if I don't, my body's going to make me scroll for 4 hours instead of go to bed.
Definitely.
It's going to come up with ways of reducing stress. And so all those behaviors that we don't like, constant scrolling, wasting time on Netflix, things like that, where we go, wow, why did I do that? It's our body saying, you know what, you need time off. You put this in front of me. It ain't great time off, but it's better than doing what you've been doing. And it's literally doing the equivalent of falling asleep behind the wheel. And that's why we get this chronic scrolling thing, is that we're looking for something that's low effort and gets us out of our problem. Where if I use, my patriarch's advice, he's saying, take charge of that and decide what your downtime is and make it happen. And then that way, instead of having downtime that's scrolling, which doesn't meet a good need, it's basically burst sleeping while the car's rolling. We choose to go to bed and get something of actual value. And so we've got to learn to create that time, hold it as important, and sometimes maybe even teach others that we're going to do that. And we can do that. I mean, it's a whole nother story. I learned to run marathons. We can make an amazing amount of time. We can learn to make room, even for the busiest of people. And if we don't, we're in trouble. And we got to learn to do it. We got to learn to grab that back and bring down the down.
And that's an interesting comment you said about having to teach other people, because I feel like there is an amount, at least in the American culture, there is an amount of shame with downtime, with allowing yourself to relax and allowing yourself to not be busy all the time. And that's a hard thing it's hard enough to teach yourself to relax, right? To step out of that burnout stage, but then to also be okay with others kind of, or at least your perception of what others think of you, because they may not be thinking that at all, but in our heads, that's how we translate it often. That's probably a whole other podcast.
I looked at it. Yeah. And to kind of go to that, think of the ratios and the numbers. There's me, and there's all the people I supervise, which is maybe 5 to 50 or 100 or 200, or I own a business and there's all my clients.
Right.
Okay. It becomes important to look at the numbers. Okay. When they intrude in their life, they're looking at the math from their side, and it's a one-on-one thing. And you've got an infinite amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
They don't take into account you're dealing with 100 people or 25 people. It's from their point of view, this is a one-to-one relationship. From
Like the
our
joke
point
with
of
all
view,
the college professors, right? That they only care about their class. They don't care about any other classes you have. So,
exactly.
yeah.
Yes, it's exactly like that.
Yeah.
And so that becomes kind of important for me to keep realizing, because what that does is that creates an opportunity for them to be highly critical of how I use my time.
Right.
Because the way they're looking at it is, wow, you're taking time to do this and you can't give me 20 more minutes. And that's how they're looking at it. They don't take into account that, I've dealt with 100 people.
Right.
So I remember I was very young. I was working at a place and I had a boss that would disappear occasionally and he would go play golf for a half a day. And I remember thinking, wow, man, how is it he gets to waste so much time and he doesn't have to do anything and he's got such a great life. And I remember, I was pretty critical of him. And then as I got older, I kind of realized, and I talked to other people, he's there every night till 11. And he's at all the stressful meetings and all the ones where you get bad news and all the ones where you got to come up with more money and more funding. And he's the one doing all of that. And so he plays golf every 2 weeks for a half a day. Now, from my point of view, yeah, he's wasting time because I'm not seeing his whole life. I'm seeing that piece that I see. And it's real easy for me to be judgmental. From his point of view, he gets to hear some of those judgmental things, and sometimes very large numbers, it gets back to him. And if he's paying too close attention to it, that becomes his standard of measurement of what he should be doing.
Yep.
He starts basing how hard I should be working on these comments and this input. And so one of the things that you've got to do is be able to make your own decisions on that and get reliable people to help you make and keep balance on what the number should be. The number shouldn't be determined by out there. The number is determined by me and my judgment. And that might mean I get advice. And I ask people that know me and understand me, the top of the pyramid people, and say, considering how hard I'm working and what I'm doing, you kind of have a grasp a little bit of this because we're at the top and you get it, and say, what do you think is a reasonable amount of time for me to step away from stuff intentionally? And we might need to get that feedback to get out of that idea. If I worked for Memorial Hermann Hospital, if he took the advice of everybody that was critical of how he was using his time, he would be a mental case.
Right.
There's 20,000 employees. He just had to arbitrarily kind of make the decision of, this is how much I'm doing for work. This is when I'm taking my downtime. And he just kind of had to learn to do it in spite of what everybody else thought he should be doing. And that's a really hard thing to do. That takes a lot of strong internal regulation to be able to say, I've got this, because we tend to lean towards, I want to hear your input. I need to, people give me, and if I'm not real secure in my own decisions, then I start taking everybody else's. And that's where the culture comes in. If we've got a workaholic culture, then all the feedback I'm going to get is, well, you need to do
Not doing
more.
enough. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and to be honest, what is enough from one job to another, from one situation to another, from one season to another in the same job? That's a variable number. That's a number that's very fluid if we're doing it right.
Right. And
But to the people looking in, it won't be.
Yeah, I feel like as a business owner, especially, and I know I keep coming back to that because that's the position I'm in, but it's hard to ever feel like you're doing enough because there's always more to do, right? No matter what season you're in, I feel like there is always something you could be doing. So I feel like being so conscious about.
And that's the other thing is that, yeah, be careful of your own lists.
Yeah. Yeah.
There will be always something to do. If you're leading a conscientious life and you have a good grasp and good mental health, it becomes very obvious that there's a lot to be done. And there's a lot more to be done. It's very healthy people see that. It's the unhealthy people that say, yeah, I got it all done, man. My life's great.
Right.
Healthy people tend to see there's more. But in seeing more doesn't mean I inadvertently and unhealthily keep doing more. I've got to learn to basically make some judgment and, like I said, use those techniques of time and seasons. Is it now or is it later? And doing an appropriate amount of moving ahead and maybe being a little bit patient with myself. So that my own list doesn't get to me. It's funny. It reminds me of a story. A long time ago, I lived in St. George, and when I was at college, it was in between, bursts of going to school. I had this break, and I worked for a guy that was out of California, and he set up a little remote phone office in St. George. And he came to kind of visit and say hi to everybody and how's it going and to set up an office. And I can't remember, he needed some computer part. And at the time, computers were fairly new and there was only two places that sold computer parts in St. George then. And so at 8:30 in the morning, he goes to the computer shop to be there when they open at 9. And he goes there and he sits out front of it and he sits out front of it. And at 9:30, he gets mad and he gets out the door and he bangs on the door. And in the process of banging on the door, he's seen that they weren't going to open until 10:30.
Dang it.
And so being St. George, it wasn't very far. He just drives back and I listened to him rant for an hour of they should be open. They should be open at 8. In California, they're open at 8. There's, how are you going to sell anything? How are you going to be a business owner if you're not open to sell products? And that was his big thing. He says, if you're a business, you have to be open so people can buy your product. And yeah, he's right. But I kind of want to say, dude, it's St. George. Yeah. Nobody's coming to your door, coming into a computer store at 9:30 in the morning to get a computer part at this day and age. It's just not going to happen. Most of your clientele is going to show up at 3.
Yeah.
When they get towards the end of the day or people get done with work and school, they're going to come in later in the day. So he tended to stay up, I knew the guy that ran the store and that's what he did. And a lot of times he stayed late. And so that's that idea that people are going to come in and they're going to criticize all the time. And they're going to feel like from their point of view, they can criticize how you're doing. The guy did fine. He ran a good business. He served his clients very well. But yeah, it was a criticism that he got. Yeah, unfortunately, he gave the business owner a big lecture, and he's never going to amount to anything. And so he went over and gave that number to him. And so there's an example of a small business owner actually doing what their clients need, being appropriate when they're going to opening when they're there, and it's an example of that criticism and stuff. And then if he's not careful, he'll create his own list and say, yeah, maybe I should be open at 8. And then he goes, well, my clients come in at 7. So I guess I'm going to have to be open until 8, 8 in the morning till 9 at night or 10 at night. And now he's created just an unsustainable day that just doesn't make any sense. And so that's where he's got to take some personal responsibility and say, how much energy do I got? Is this where I want to put it? Is the way I want to lean into it? And start creating his own limits to it so he doesn't just overdo it and then break down.
I love that. I was actually watching a presentation by Dave Ramsey earlier today, and he was talking about the same thing. He just kept repeating, we don't react to the comments. So just talking about people's, feedback or whatever that they give on his radio show and podcasts and all that. And he's like, yeah, you can say whatever you want, but I know what I'm doing. And yes, we take, and I loved, and you kind of touched on this too. I love that he talked about, he does listen and he uses those moments for reflection, but then he applies it to what he feels is right for his business. So he doesn't take it as direction, he takes it as information.
I treat that, for me, that's a taste.
Yeah.
Not everything I'm going to put in my mouth should I swallow. Some things I'm going to put in my mouth and they're just vile and I should spit them out. Good way to put it. And other things are going to be great and I probably ought to swallow them. But even the great things, I probably ought to use some discretion and not swallow everything that tastes great.
Right.
And for me, that's what comments are in the comments kind of section. If anybody's got a life or a business where they're going to get a lot of input from a lot of people, one of the things they've got to do is they've got to learn to taste some of the content. Mm-hmm. And some of it they need to taste and just go, you got your opinion, but it's just not me. In Ramsey's case, he's basically saying, you think you know what you're doing, but really I'm the expert. That's him saying, oh, that tastes bad. Yeah. There's 50 of you thinking that, I know that you're thinking that. And he's using his own decision and his own professional understanding and saying, you're wrong. I'm not internalizing that. Some people are just make it personal and vile. And what they're hoping you do is you internalize it because they made it personal. Mm-hmm. And those are the ones we've got to learn to catch the most. And learn to say, yeah, I don't need to taste that much. I can learn to recognize that one without tasting that and say, I'm not going to take that one in ever. I just don't even need to go there. Because when we're talking large numbers of comments, you're going to get if you sit and think about it statistically, if only 1% is going to say something vile, well, you're getting 100 comments. That's no big deal. You're getting 10,000 or 100,000 comments, then that's going to be a significant number of really vile things. And we've got to learn to say, yeah, I've tasted that before. It's got nothing to do with me. That's a you problem. I'm not even tasting that. And then look through it on the other end. Too much candy is going to kill you. So likewise, sitting there and feeding off of the great comments
Hmm.
off of the webpage and only living at that end, you're going to get a distorted look of reality. You're going to end up getting high blood pressure and being unhealthy and gaining weight. You're taking in too much of the good stuff. And so we got to use discretion in that too. Sometimes we've got to sit back and say, okay, I'm doing a good job, but I don't need to reinforce that in my own head all day long. That's not gonna, I'm gonna turn into a person I'm not gonna like by doing that.
Right.
And so you're tasting the comments and swallowing the only one, you swallow the ones that you think are needful and will do you some good to learn from. The rest are just tastes.
I love that. Maybe a little dessert. Gotta have a little dessert.
A little dessert's fine. I don't care if you live there a little bit. It's totally okay. But what we're kind of taught is we've almost got this guilt trip that you've got to swallow everything.
Right.
The good and the bad comments. I'm working with a couple people that are, they're posting a lot of stuff and they're getting a lot of comments, and some of the comments are just terrible and vile. And they feel the sense of obligation of, in order for me to be, good at what I'm doing, I've got to wade through all of this and listen to all of this. And I'm kind of like, no, you don't. Because one of the character traits of highly successful people is they delicately listen to everything, but they don't absorb everything they're told. They go down to the factory floor and they look at how the cars are being built and they listen to the input of the people building the cars, but they don't swallow everything they say. They go back with that set of thoughts and they kind of taste the different comments, and then they compare it to what they like and what they think is the right thing to do. And then they take only those pieces, and the rest they kind of let go. And so a lot of the great CEOs, that's one of the patterns they do, is they get a lot of input, but they don't swallow it all. They only act on the ones that seem appropriate for the time and move them in the direction of the mission statement of what they're doing, of what is their purpose. Those are the ones that they take into their lives. The ones that don't have, some might be good comments, but they have nothing to do with progressing the company.
Right.
And so they learn to have that focus of, what is my goal here, what are we doing? And as a small business owner, that's probably a big trait, is if you don't have a mission statement, and I hate the word mission statement, but at least a vision of what you're doing and why you're doing what you're doing, you're going to get caught up in too many peripheral good things
If you have no
that aren't.
focus. Yeah.
You're going to be too spread out. You're eating everything. And yeah, you might be eating some great stuff, but you're not going to move forward. You're going to get overloaded eventually.
Yeah, I've definitely been in that position. It's a real
Yeah.
thing.
So yeah. So, it's okay to say that's not part of my focus. It's a nice comment, but that's not the direction I'm headed. And we feel like we're doing something wrong a lot of times. We're not. We're successful, highly successful people. And that also contributes to reducing burnout, because you're mentally you're starting to, I hate the word boundary, but you're kind of creating an edge there that says, yeah, this isn't coming in.
Right.
Great comment, maybe very valid, but doesn't really have anything to do with what I'm doing in the next 3 months.
Yeah.
And that, and going back to that metaphor that we talked about on boundaries, I can still then reach over and connect you in another way into my life. It doesn't have to be that one. I can find something else and keep that relationship going.
As needed, right? Unless they are those ones that you just spit out. Right.
Unless it's toxic.
Yeah.
And it's totally
And
okay.
you let it go.
You let it go. It's all right.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much. I feel like we've taken a lot of your time today, but I appreciate you. Any last thoughts that you feel like could be beneficial for anyone listening or watching this today? Any nuggets of wisdom?
A short nugget, have more fun. If you're not laughing at what you're laughing and having fun with you're doing, then at some point I think we're creatures that were meant to be happy. We were meant to be full of happiness. And if that's not a major thing in our life, or that's not something something we're losing contact with, then I'd say we need to stop and kind of evaluate things. That's where I might come in and say, okay, depression is the inability to get to there anymore. Maybe I need help with depression or anxiety on a clinical level, and talk about how to make that go away, because what I've literally lost is the biology ability to feel that way. And so, or maybe I'm just so stressed, but the idea is that seek it out. That should be part of in my personal idea that whatever our personal mission statement is for work ought to have some reflection in having happiness or joy or in what we're doing. We don't have to I'm trying to think of the guy, the Dirty Jobs guy. Um, did the show Dirty Jobs. He's the voice for Deadliest Catch.
Yeah, I can't remember his name, but I know
I
who you're
can't
thinking
remember. Yeah, I can't remember his name. He tells this, he did an episode once of a guy that's a billionaire and he's one of the big, he's a giant pig farmer. And he was like 80, 90 years old. It was this old guy. And he invented this thing where he would go gather up all the leftover food from all the hotels. And he worked this deal with them where he'd gather up all their leftover food that was scraped off of plates. He'd bring it back and he had a machine that would chop it all up, add nutrients to it, add some things to fill it out. And then he'd feed all these pigs with it. And he had this giant pig processing plant, a few miles outside of Vegas, and he had these custom labeled trucks that would go into special slots and just dump truckloads of wasted food from the casinos. And he says, and he tells this story. He says, I asked him one day, and he goes, "Do you like what you're doing?" And he looks at me and he says, "This is a little old man worth a fortune. He should be literally enjoying his millions of dollars." And he goes, "Are you kidding? This is stinky, nasty work." And he goes, "You'd have to be out of your mind to say this is fun." And he said it that way, kind of sarcastically. He goes, "Well, why do you do it?" And he says, "But I enjoy succeeding. I enjoy accomplishing something. I enjoy that I'm adding value." And so what he had done is we don't have to love everything about what we're doing, but we do have to have some connection into how it's lifting our lives up and so in one hand, he's saying, yeah, the work's actually awful. But he says, I love doing and figuring out this and being successful so much that I just don't feel like retiring. This is what I'm doing. And I thought that was an interesting contrast between the two, because we've got this idea of we got to love everything or don't do it, or you got to do it and you can't have anything. He's exhibiting this really healthy balance of if you're doing something that matters, it's going to be hard. But if it's gotten to the point where it's only hard, you're disconnecting from it. You're missing something. And maybe you need to do something about getting new direction or helping yourself or figuring it out so that you don't stay stuck in that category where you're accomplishing something that doesn't have any level of meaning or joy or happiness in it. Because we're capable of having happiness in really difficult things. And I think that's one of the things that we need to remember and make sure it's happening, because it's a red flag if it's not.
I love that.
Is that an okay last thought?
Beautiful. Thank you. So if anyone listening to this, because of course this is going to go viral and everybody's going to want to listen to it because it was incredible. If anybody has found so much value out of this that they want to reach out and do coaching with you, what does the process look like for that? How do they reach out to you? How do they connect with you?
I haven't been asked that question in a situation like this. So what you do is, I've got a website. It's KendalAllsop.com. And there you've got a way to send me an email. If you're you can actually go in and directly, set an appointment up with me. It'll ask, it'll send me a notification. You'll do a little bit of paperwork, and you can actually schedule an appointment there. But I'll be happy to, do quick consults and touch base with people to see if they're interested. I'm licensed as a therapist in Utah, Idaho, and Texas, but I can do coaching, quality of life, stress management, career development, how to have more happiness in your life. I can do that pretty much in any state. But, the severe mental health things, where it might involve more of a mental health kind of issue, that I'd be limited in those states.
Awesome. We'll make
And
sure
that's probably the easiest way. Yeah.
Okay. We'll make sure to put all of that in the description so that people don't have to remember, but we'll get that.
That sounds fantastic.
Okay. Thank you, Kendal. You are fabulous. Thank you so much for doing this. We appreciate you.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it. It's fun.